Hi guys, today we will be starting the fifth chapter of Sitaram Goel's book, How I Became a Hindu, and I'll be reading two full pages of the fifth chapter. It's called Close to the Communist Party. This part is very important, and this is where he basically goes into the thick of things while in Kolkata, and he mentions something very important. He mentions an incident which is almost forgotten in history and that people are only recently finding out, like many other things in society today. I'll tell you about it when we read it. Listen to the very interesting things that lead him to these conclusions. So the chapter is called Close to the Communist Party. I saw quite a bit of the great Calcutta killings of August 16 and 17, 1946 with my own eyes. There were a large number of dead bodies lying on the streets. There were many more floating down the Hooghly. I saw an extensive destruction of private and public property by fire as well as by mob fury. The death and destruction, the desolation all around moved me to despair about human nature itself. But I did not try to find the causes of this Holocaust or to fix its responsibility on the political movement which had provoked it. Instead, I wrote a long article, The Devil Dance in Calcutta, which I called it, in which I held both Hindus and Muslims equally responsible for this meaningless massacre. The article was circulated in a cyclo-style newsletter, which a circle of friends were publishing from the Delhi. Some of these friends appreciated the graphic picture I had drawn and the literary flourishes I had displayed. But the letter I received from Ram Swarup in the next few days was quite different in its tone. He had not appreciated my sitting on the fences and equating Muslim violence with Hindu violence. He urged me to see the right and wrong involved in what I had described as an internecine strife. According to him, Muslim violence was aggressive and committed to the furtherance of a very reactionary and retrograde cause, namely the vivisection of India. Hindu violence, on the other hand, was defensive and forced upon them in the service of a very worthy cause, namely the unity and integrity of India, which was worth even a civil war. I must confess that I could not see the point. I was not prepared to forgive the Hindus for the orgy of murder in which they also had indulged. How were the Hindus in a better moral position, even if it was granted that Muslims had started it in the first instance? A few months earlier, Ram Swarup had sent to me the typescript of a long dialogue, Let us have riots, the philosophy of those who want to divide India by street riots, which he had written in a Shavian style, which means in the style of George Bernard Shaw. Many prominent political leaders belonging to the Congress, the Muslim League and the Hindu Mahasabha figured in it. Dr. Ambedkar had also made his own characteristic contribution on the subject of partition. I laughed hilariously as I read it again and again. The Muslim League leaders, particularly Mr. Jinnah, had made themselves thoroughly ridiculous. So had Pandit Nehru, who could see nothing beyond what he described as Hindu communalism and could not talk coherently on any subject for more than a few sentences. Ram Swarup had a way of putting their own words in the mouths of many leaders which took away the glamour with which they were clad in public eyes and reduced them to their real stature, which was puny and piteous most of the time. But I again failed to read the serious message spread all over this dialogue. I could not see the tragedy of the situation in which a whole national leadership had surrendered not only its political will, but also its moral judgment to a pack of bullies, rowdies, clowns, and lunatics. The tragedy was all the greater because this national leadership also represented a large chunk of the educated Hindus who passed as the intellectual and political elite. By now I had become emotionally as well as intentionally neutral between Hindus and Muslims. There was perhaps a tilt towards the Muslim point of view. The communist pamphlets which I had read in support of Pakistan had left me cold for all practical purposes. But the communist weekly New Age, which I now bought and read regularly, had started exercising its influence. This weekly always presented the Muslims as the exploited peasantry and proletariat and the Hindus as the exploiting landlords and capitalists. It constantly accused the Congress leadership of striking a compromise, almost a bargain, with the British imperialists for sharing power and wealth rather than make a common cause with the Muslim League leadership and seize power by revolutionary mass action. Now the most important paragraph. My disgust for the Hindus was reinforced by what I heard from my own people amongst whom I lived again after I had sent my family to the village. These were the same people who had always ridiculed me as an educated nincompoop. They were always denouncing Mahatma Gandhi, many a time in pretty foul language. The Mahatma was moving about in Noakhali, where Hindus had been massacred and molested on a large scale by Muslim mobs, maddened by Muslim League demagogues. He was doing his best bit to put down the fires of communal frenzy. He certainly did not deserve the denunciations which my people were daily hurling at him. These denunciations became more violent when the Mahatma went on a fast unto death to restrain the Hindus of Bihar, who now became bent upon taking revenge for Noakhali. Mahatma Gandhi could not stop any Muslims writing on committing genocides on Hindus, so he decided to convince Hindus to not retaliate. So this part is important because he talks of Hindus of Bihar and the retaliation. This caused the Patna riots and Bihar riots of 1946, which you should definitely read about. At least look at Wikipedia, get some basic information, because this is a place where Jawaharlal Nehru had not become the Prime Minister yet, but he had enough sway with the British and British Air Force. So he asked them to threaten them. He threatened the people of Patna that I will bombard you, I'll carpet bomb all over Patna if you don't stop the riot. And then he wrote to Sarojini Naidu's daughter, who was supposedly his girlfriend, that today about 200 people died. In any other situation, I would be really sad and feel remorse. But in this case, I do not, because it at least made the riots stop, even though the riots hadn't begun yet. And he was also, people say that his shirt and collar was torn by college students who had confronted him when he went to give those threats in those college campuses and in the form of his speeches. And those students had asked him that why aren't you doing enough and about the Noakhali riots. So that's how he quashed those riots, by threatening to send them back to the Stone Age by bombarding them with British Air Force bombings. Hindus of Bihar who now became bent upon taking revenge for Noakhali. I also used equally violent language in defense of Mahatma Gandhi. The result was my excommunication from the community to which I belonged. They started calling me Suar ka bacha Suravardi, son of a swine, Suravardi.